What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I am back with yet another album review, and yet another one I think that was pretty anticipated this week. Today, I am going over the latest offering from Harakiri for the Sky with their album Scorched Earth. This also comes out on the 24th of January on AOP Records. This band formed in 2011 in Austria. This is their 8th album overall. Admittedly, I got into this band a little bit late. I got into them with their album Mare, and I ended up really enjoying that album. This band is, pretty much textbook post-black metal. These guys, I would say, pretty much embody that style. And baseline, I would say, this is the perfect band to stoke the embers of your seasonal depression. This band practically just drips sadness and longing and forlorn. Again, take your pick of depressing adjectives. That is 100% this band. But at the same time, they do find this interesting balance between soaring, lush melodies and atmosphere and I would say brighter, almost anthemic hooks. It creates this very interesting contrast in the music. And I was looking forward to going over this one, even though I really didn't jam any of the tracks before it came out. And perhaps I should have, because even in comparison to Mare, which is, again, the only album I own by this band, this feels a little bit different and not necessarily in a good way. Now, with post-black metal, I'm just as picky as I am when it comes down to black metal. There's certain sounds that I look for in certain styles. In terms of post-black metal, bands that I do I would say White Ward, Ghostbath, Numenorian are really solid examples. But bands that I'm not necessarily a fan of within that same style, I would say, are Death Heaven and Alcest. Yeah, I'm not much of an Alcest fan. I know that band gets a lot of love. For the life of me, I just really can't get into them. It might have something to do with me seeing them live years ago, opening for Enslaved, and they were just one of the most boring things I've seen live. This band kind of sits in between all those bands, and there's definitely a lot of overlap in terms of the style. The songwriting is very similar. The songs are long, drawn out, lots of very labored builds and loads of atmosphere. And right from the rip, the opening track, Heal Me, is a big, almost 9-minute, just giant-sized song filled with lush guitars, beautiful pianos. Honestly, the production on here is fantastic. It sounds great. The guitars have this great crunchy tone. They still feel very atmospheric, but they have a good hefty crunch to them, and they're so layered. And in terms of melodies and such, the melodies in here are beautiful. They're sad, they're somber. You get a lot of heavy strumming. There's a lot of stuff in here that reminds me of Catatonia's Brave Murder Day. That same sort of vibe, that rainy day, down in the dumps, just melancholic as fuck sort of melody. The drums on here sound excellent too. They were all done by Krim Lechner of Septic Flesh, formerly of Decapitated, and actually he's been in a absolute fuck ton of bands. Excellent drum work as always, and he is a session player in here because this band is essentially 2 members. One, Matthias Solok, who does, I believe, all of the instrumentation outside of drums in this case, and vocalist V. Wantrum. He goes by the initials JJ. I don't know where you pull one from the other there, but, whatever. But there's a good instrumental build to this opening track, and then you get these vocals that come in. And the vocals are going to be a thing I bring up a little bit later, but to describe the style, they are desperate, they are anguished, and they are kind of atypical of black metal in general. You don't get that kind of grim, sort of cold, almost goblin-like vocal style that, it's kind of all over black metal, I guess you could say. These feel more adjacent to post-hardcore, very emotional, desperate, exhausted at times. I feel that they have more in common with bands like Thursday or, a lot of mid-2000s, post-hardcore, that sort of thing, rather than, black metal. Or at least when it comes down to black metal, more of depressive black metal. This sounds like they just recorded all of this dude's vocal sessions after a horrible breakup. But I'll get back to those just because they're kind of a point of contention for me with this release, and it does kind of involve the last album I listened to by them. But musically, again, lush. Lots of really cool drum patterns. You get, good, solid grooves and such, but tons of blast beats. And again, the melodies on here are soaring. They're beautiful. Songs like With Autumn I'll Surrender and I Was Just Another Promise You Couldn't Keep. Yeah, there's definitely like some depressing themes on here. Beautiful guitar work. The riffs are catchy. They maintain this just very sad, melancholic vibe throughout, but they layer them in such a beautiful way. Like you get the heavy, just kind of droning riffs, and then on top of that, you get a lot of these just beautifully sad melodies. Cool, clean playing too, and again, like lots of like interesting transitions into cleaner play and then long labored builds. This band definitely does like the post-metal side of this pretty well when it comes down to like building tension and then erupting into these big, heavy, but again, very soaring parts. None of this, I would scream, is like aggressive at all. Like a lot of this really kind of lurks in a very, very somber sort of gear. But that is not to say it's not heavy. It's definitely heavy, but it's more like emotional heavy. Like they want you to feel the weight of all the emotion that went into this. And believe me, you definitely do, because they labor it a lot. Whether it's drawn out passages of the same melancholic riff that is just beaten into your head, or whether they decide to accent those melodies with pianos, synths, or even strings occasionally, or at least it sounded like there were strings. Could have been synths, but it definitely sounded like strings. Or at least they did on Keep Me Longing, where that's where I really detected them. And honestly, they kind of give it like a very interesting kind of like folky sort of vibe, like something that would not sound out of place on like a later Amorphous album, or even like an early In Flames album too. But even when the synths sound more like straightforward, like, oh yeah, that's 100% a synth, they kind of have like this interesting sort of like, I don't know, like gothic quality. With Autumn I'll Surrender in particular, that song possibly my favorite out of all these songs. It opens up with a pulsating synth and then kind of breaks into this like, you know, nice like up-tempo groove with these really cool, like kind of almost goth metal riffs. Like honestly, it kind of reminded me of Cemetery Skyline or anything like remotely adjacent to that, which also could probably have some overlap with Amorphous too. I like that it added like a different texture to their sound, because like a good portion of this really kind of lays on the same melodies being repeated for long stretches of time, and then again like dropouts and builds back to those same melodies again. This song in particular, I don't know, it didn't necessarily escape that, but there were enough dynamics in there to kind of like, you know, mix it up a little bit. It didn't feel like the song plateaued, which is kind of an issue with this album overall. I feel like a lot of this is needlessly drawn out, because a lot of the melodies they're going for are catchy. They are really solid, but they are hung on to way too long, and they kind of, well, you know, lose their luster after a little while. We've brought up before, like saying you can have too much of a good thing. These melodies are awesome. The guitar playing on here is great. I really like just how flat out catchy this is. And again, that sort of like strangely soaring vibe that's on a lot of this, I really enjoy it, but it can go on too long. Keep Me Longing and Without You, I'm Just a Sad Song in particular, really just kind of like tested my patience with that. Both of those songs are over 10 minutes long. And again, while I like a good long song, it kind of just hangs there. Like, you know, musically it starts plateauing at a certain point where you're like, okay, I've heard this melody. You're not really doing much different here. And then it's going to drop out and we're going to get like an interesting transition. And then we're going to go right back to the same melody. And once again, we're at cruising altitude. Now, I know one of the tropes of like post-metal in general, like post anything, is drawing it out, deconstructing and rebuilding. That's a big part of the sound, but it can stagnate if there's not enough dynamics to mix it up. There are some cool parts on here that I really like in terms of transitions that do make certain songs stand out a little bit more, but most of them just hang there. And strangely enough, I didn't feel this way about Mare. In fact, I went back and listened to Mare not long after the first time I listened to this one, and then revisited this one afterwards. And I felt like the songs there were just a little bit better constructed in terms of the dynamics. Like they didn't hang there as much. And there was also kind of a big difference there. While the vocal approach, I would say, is kind of the same when it comes down to like the overall delivery, the fact that the vocals are very much out in front on this one versus being way in the back of the mix on Mare makes a big difference, because the vocals honestly were kind of a deal breaker on here. While you can definitely feel the emotional weight of them. Again, they sound desperate, they sound agonized. This dude does not sound like he's in good shape. They also don't add much to the music. In fact, as an instrumental album, I might have probably liked this a little bit more. I'm sure the lyrics were poignant and very relevant to the subject matter. I mean, you don't come up with song titles like this and just say, oh no, this is all going to be about happy shit. I don't feel this way at all. But it's the same delivery on virtually every track. There's really no variation to his growl. And it's not particularly tuneful, which this whole album is very tuneful. It's loaded with melody, but there's very few moments on here where the vocals complement the melody. In fact, those are generally done by other people. Too Late for Goodbyes, which is the 7th track on here, was where it kind of broke out of that and you have some clean female vocals. And it was the first time on here where I felt like the vocals are really complementing this melody really well, and it actually is sticking with me. Now they inevitably shift back to the, desperate growls and screams or whatever he's doing, but that little break there was a nice reprieve from kind of the monotony of this. The other moment on here, and I'm still going to count it even though it's a cover song, was Street Spirit, Fade Out, which is a Radiohead cover off of the Bends, which reminds me I still need to get a copy of the Bends. The vocalist from the band, Groza, steps in and does the vocals, and he has this really solid, just kind of, wispy, airy, kind of haunted, clean vocal delivery that I really enjoyed. I thought it really complemented the song itself, and I'm glad they didn't decide to kind of growl it out. And the more I listened to that cover, I was like, man, why didn't they have these breaks on here, on their regular songs where, a tuneful vocal part could really complement all the melody in here? Because this is predominantly melody. There's nothing on here, again, that I would call brutal or sinister or dark. It is more melody driven, but it's just played very intensely. With Mare having the vocals more in the back of the mix, I felt like it was just like an additional atmospheric thing. And honestly, they sounded way more like cavernous, like there was definitely more reverb on them. I thought it complemented the music pretty well, and it wasn't like intrusive. Like, yeah, they were kind of the same, but at the same time, the music was so out front that you really stayed focused on the music, which I thought the music was maybe a little bit better on that one too. But here with the vocals very much out front, I feel like I was just like sitting down with someone who, again, is going through a terrible breakup and they're just a complete wreck, like telling me, like, dude, I could still smell her on my sheets. And me responding, dude, it's been 3 months. Wash your fucking sheets. So while there's definitely things that I like about this album in terms of like melodies and builds and again, like some really interesting dynamics, the main thing that kind of like put me off on here was it got monotonous. It kind of plateaued at a certain point, and I felt like they kind of drew out these songs way too much, especially when they're more like hook laden. They're definitely more melodic. I feel like if you trimmed some of the fat on these songs, I feel like the melodies would have more impact. Like, repeating them over and over and over again for long stretches and long measures, it kind of deadens the impact. Like, it doesn't become that big moment in the song where you're just like, man, that was just absolutely magical. It just becomes like, wow, that's really good. I really wish they would like move on. So I'm kind of torn on here because there's definitely stuff I like, but there's definitely stuff that makes this kind of a chore to listen to. So overall, I'm going to give it a 3. I didn't necessarily hate it, and I feel like if it was done with, again, like maybe some more like vocal dynamics, like I think that might have like really made me enjoy this a bit more. And maybe a little bit of fat trimming too, because this is like an 1 hour and 7 minute long album. I feel like I probably would have liked it more. I like what they do. It's an interesting take on black metal. The fact that, most of the melodies have this bright sort of like soaring vibe to them. I love when they build in these giant crescendos, those layered, just beautiful guitars, and some of these clean passages on here are flat out just pretty as hell. The drum performance absolutely crushes. That's what Krim does. And they definitely capture all of that emotional heaviness for sure. But it gets to a point where it just becomes too much. And again, I would like to hear just like a different vocal approach because, I don't know, like after a while, it got really old. And by a while, like, I'm gonna just go ahead and say by the second track, I was like, okay, I'm just kind of not feeling this. Still though, if you're a big fan of, Ghostbath, Numenorian, Alcest, I guess too, Death Heaven, yeah, maybe. Or, you know, just like post-black metal in general, I would still say check this out, form your own opinion. Who knows, you might absolutely love this, but you won't know until you actually check it out. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you were new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We have memberships now. They're only 99 cents, and we do a members-only live stream every now and then. We're gonna have to maybe wait a little bit because John is still, again, recovering from being sick. Hopefully he's feeling better by the time you see this. I think he's pretty much on the mend now. But the memberships is the new way to directly support the channel. If you guys would like, we also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. That is linked down below in the video description. And of course, if you were interested in becoming a member of this thing, there's a join button somewhere. And of course, thank you guys so much for liking, commenting, sharing, all that stuff. It means the world to us. We hit 20,000 subscribers, which is surreal. By the time you see this, hopefully we are getting ready to record the Motley Crue ranking, so we can literally move on to any other ranking. I mean, At the Gates is up after that one, and I'm way more excited about that. But yeah, we also have some other stuff planned for you, more States Metal, more collection updates. We're going to get back to those, and probably some more discussion videos, because I have a couple of ideas for stuff to talk about that might be fun. Either way, thank you guys so much for every bit of support you guys have given us, and we will catch you later.